Hi, it's Mary Beth Decker with sacredgrove.com, where people and pets heal and connect. And I am really lucky to have Pete here today. Pete Johnson. Let me read his bio and you can see why I feel like I'm lucky to have Pete here today. So, with an esteemed career as a chief operations officer, multiple patent holder, and co-founder of a 30-plus year best-in-class international business, Peter understands the importance of knowledge, its value in the marketplace, the healing it can bring to the suffering, and the ethics it requires. As a native of Virginia Beach, Virginia, Peter grew up and still lives in the light and influence of the Edgar Cayce Foundation. With a university education and business success long achieved, Peter followed the divine nudge to combine his unique psychic skill set with his practical business acumen. Peter's primary audience is best classified as business to business. Now, hang in with me because we don't usually talk about business to business, but you're going to love what we're talking about here. Government and law enforcement agencies, insurance companies, human resource departments, law firms, and healthcare providers, among others. His services include intuitive personnel, partnership, and executive assessment, management, and selection, psychic location and evidence recovery, and strategic foresight, prediction, and analysis of energetic trends for opportunity exploration and maximization. However, today we focus on a subset of Peter's skills, namely telepathic communication at the end of life, or what Peter more easily terms mediumship for the living. Peter works on a contractual or consultant type basis with skilled nursing, memory care, home health, autism, and other private service providers to deliver unique communication services for the family members, friends, or caretakers of those approaching the end of life, or others who are permanently or temporarily unable to communicate for themselves. This includes the unconscious, persons on the spectrum, stroke victims, dementia patients, infants, and more. Be it misunderstood or troubling behaviors, final wishes, or proactively clearing any lingering question or issue before transition. Telepathic communication can be instrumental in reframing complex relationships or familial issues to enable a compassionate and healing space, not only for the person themselves, but also for the caretakers or family members that remain. Pete, welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. That's a mouthful, I know.
You know, it was, and I thought, no, but I need to say all of this. There's something magical in all those words, and I'm hoping everybody's feeling that energy that you have around what you do. So I'm going to stop for a second and say, tell us more, Pete. Tell us a little bit more before I ask questions.
I have a general focus of the other work that I do, which I find quite rewarding, particularly that with the law enforcement and other. But admittedly, the work that I find the most gratifying and fulfilling is this the telepathic work, particularly for those that are at the end of life. As you know, I both know you can communicate telepathically with all life. From pets and people and, many people say plants and all the other stuff. You can do all of that. However, you'll see so many shows nowadays that are mediumship based. And I always thought, well, it feels like it's so after the fact when you're trying to help somebody move through grief or to help them resolve something when the person is no longer here. And it was actually my father-in-law, when he began to develop dementia, I had my mediumistic skills, they already existed, and I used them to a certain extent, but I realized that my father-in-law, who was still with us and still is, was beginning to communicate with me. And that's when I was like, okay, it was a bit of a twist for me, but I liked it. Because he was still able to communicate, but there were things going on that as he found himself deeper and deeper in dementia, he couldn't voice. And for anybody that knows of the heartbreaking necessity of caring for somebody in this and moving towards the end of life, having practical solutions and answers and understanding, particularly of what's really going on with people, it doesn't make it any easier on your heart, but it can make it much easier consciously as you deal with this over a protracted period of time. So this is where I consider it, although I'm desperately sad to really have lost the companionship and golf buddy that my father-in-law was, his let's put it, willingness to kind of step in and realize he could, on some level, his higher self realized he could communicate with me. That's what began this journey. And that's when I realized, well, okay, I can communicate with him. What about somebody else who can't communicate, like an autistic kid or something like that? And that's where this kind of whole area that I termed mediumship for the living. I don't believe you had communicated with, I don't know if you communicated with Dewey. Did you, my dog? I don't remember if you did or not.
I think Dewey was already
Gone?
We may have connected.
He was showing up at Val's Dog Bowl. That's
yeah, he did.
So, he was one of those that, he took his sweet time. And, this was part of my, part of one of the things that I tell people, and it's one of my points that sometimes, and I think for animals and people, I had an Alzheimer's patient tell me once, I will exit like I lived. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? Exit as I lived, exit as I lived. All right. And it brought me back to the fact that, my father-in-law was in life an incredibly methodical man, incredibly detail-oriented, approached everything with excruciating precision. He was an engineer. Right? So it was one of these things where, okay, that's who he was in life. That was his personality. So guess how he's going to work through his exit in that same exact way. So this is where, I think as we realize, okay, our pet or the person we love is kind of moving towards the end here, we remember who they were in life also. And, I was thinking about, oh my gosh, I don't want to be sitting around forever and a day like this. I wouldn't want that at all. But my wife reminded me, she said, you make decisions incredibly quickly. You have no regrets. You move forward. She said, you're going to be gone in an instant. You're bang, you're just going to go. And I said, that's probably very true, because I'm just like, okay, seen it, done it, gone, bye, gone. And that's going to be me, because that's my personality. That's the way that I approached everything in life. And I think as we look at our pets and the people that we love, was this the pet that constantly smelled every blade of grass and did what they wanted to do? Was this the pet that ran through and, whatever? We figure out sometimes what was that personality, and they will a lot of times kind of exhibit during that labor of leaving very much what their personality was. They want to figure it out, and our pets can be incredibly thoughtful. And the way that they approach things, the way that they look at their lives, themselves, their impact on the family. And a lot of times I think that same thing goes into it, and I honestly do think, are they going to be okay when I'm not here? Because I have a job in this house. Who's going to do my job?
Absolutely. Yeah, so, I've seen that too. Yep.
So that's where I think it's all part of that. And it's the same for people. A person like myself who goes very quickly, bang, I'm not going to have any issue. A very methodical, very stubborn person, they're going to approach it differently also. So it's realizing that that's a part of the process. And I think as I communicate with people, I try to clear out any regrets, try to figure out if there's any lingering issues, try to help them resolve anything they need to resolve. And then I let them be their personality at the end. I say, we figured all this out. We've talked to whoever you wanted. We managed to communicate who you wanted to see. Now you do the rest. You've got it. You move on as you choose. And that's when they, they still revert back to that personality. Well, I'm still going to think about this a little while, and I'm going to do, okay, that's who you were. That's who you were in life. And I think our pets in many ways do the exact same thing.
Yeah. That's so insightful, Peter.
Yeah.
Thank you. That is really helpful to take a look at how they lived, whether they're human or non-human, and see that may be the same process as they exit.
Yeah.
And I have met animals who are absolutely waiting. I mean, this week I think I talked to somebody and said, your dog needs to know you're going to be okay. You're going to survive when they pass. And because the lady wasn't quite sure, and I said, you need to look through and see if you've got the strength, and if you do, we need to let her know. Because again, they do care about us. They're that's for many, it is a thought. It's part of the thought process of going. And then some of the animals who go through accidents and things like that, I think that might be applicable. I hadn't thought about it, but that might be applicable for those folks too. It's a traumatic way to lose somebody. But what you're saying, do you think that could be true for animals as well?
I think that anything that is typically traumatic towards the end, will quite often lead to some lingering issues that are want to be resolved. And I've most often encountered this in those that were comatose at the time that I communicate, because of whatever reason, be it a stroke or they had some type of accident or something like that happened. That's where, you kind of walk in and figure out, is there something that the family wants to know, or is there something that's unexplained? Is there something that, because, once again, if that person does not make it for whatever reason, the family would want to know certain things, certain details. Was there more that I wanted, so this is where I try to get those things figured out. And I will see that quite often in those that, have had something physically happen traumatically that they can't, that caught even them off guard. And, I would imagine certainly too with animals and others, if they happen to, brushed by a car or something like this, there's going to be things that like, oh, wait, hold on. And
how did I
then,
get here?
yeah, and that's where we work to figure that out. And there are there are those people like animals that they will claw their way back from anything, because that's part of their personality. They are just going to do everything they can to get back and do it for whatever it is. And then there are some people that think, well, okay, they don't try as hard. Once again, that's where I believe that kind of personality issue steps in for many of them. And obviously your dog said, hey, don't give up on me yet. No, and I think that's that personality. I because I think a lot of times when I encounter somebody who's at the end and I can't figure out what's going on, my question, the way that I phrase it to them is, I don't say, God, why are you still here? Or something like that. I typically go in, I say, what are you holding on to? Is there something that you're holding on to that you want to know or find out or do? And that phrasing of the what are you holding on to, which was taught to me by a friend of mine who does similar work, really works. And it's like, I'm holding on to this, that, and then we look to clear that out and go. And I said that was another that trauma can do it, lead to unresolved stuff. But it's all, once again, the biggest lesson I'd learned recently was the personality is just as big of a piece of the puzzle as getting rid of some of the lingering issues at the end, allowing them to exit as they lived with the same dignity that you put up with their stubborn behavior while they were alive. It was frustrating, but you put up with it. Okay, that's probably the way they're going to work out this exit.
Thank you. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I did. And Peter, thank you for taking the time to talk to me. And I'll say best wishes. And
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
all righty.